The rain in this valley doesn't beat against the ground. It settles soft and cold, soaking into the deep moss of the mountainside. You are standing in the Isdal Valley in Norway. The year is 1970. It is quiet here, the kind of silence that feels like a heavy blanket draped over the world. Most people think detective work is adrenaline and chase scenes. They are wrong. Real mystery is slow. It is the rhythmic turning of pages in a dusty archive and the sound of rain tapping against a window pane while you wait for an answer that may never come. Tonight, we are going to walk through that rain together. We are going to look at a woman who erased her own name and a man who sat down on a beach to watch the ocean and never got up. I am the Sleepless Detective. Close your eyes and let the fog roll in. You start by doing what the living always do in places like this. You follow a path that looks harmless. Wet heather, dark rocks, a slope that tries to convince your ankles to quit. The locals call this place Isdalen, the Ice Valley, and sometimes the Valley of Death, if they want to sound dramatic. But the truth is simpler. People get lost here. People fall, people freeze, and sometimes people burn. It is late autumn, and the air has that thin metallic bite, the kind that makes your nose feel too awake. A professor from Bergen is out walking with his two daughters. It is not a police story at first. It is a family story. Boots sinking into moss, soft complaints about cold fingers, a father pointing out a ridgeline through fog. Then the smell arrives. Not the clean smell of rain, not the sour smell of wet wool. Something else, sweet and oily, like a ruined candle. It is faint at first, then it settles into your throat. The professor looks down a little hollow among the rocks, and he sees what no one wants to see on a weekend walk. A woman is lying there on her back. You think you know this scene already. You think it is a hiker who slipped. You think it is exposure. You think it is tragic, but simple. Wrong. Even from a distance, the details are wrong. The posture is wrong. The scattered objects are wrong. And the silence around her is wrong, as if the valley itself is holding its breath. When the police arrive, they do not arrive like heroes. They arrive like men in heavy coats, annoyed that their cigarettes will not stay lit. They move carefully because Whetstone does not care about your badge. You step with them now, watching the ground, because the ground is always where the truth tries to hide. The woman is badly burned. Her face is damaged enough that it does not offer easy answers. Nearby, there are things that look like the leftover pieces of a small, private ritual. A plastic bottle, a few personal items, charred paper, an umbrella, collapsed like a tired bird, and jewelry. Here is the part that makes you pause. Jewelry arranged in a way that looks almost intentional. There is no hiking pack, no sensible boots, no clear sign she belonged to this valley at all. The professor and his daughters back away, holding each other's sleeves, because this is the moment when your ordinary life is no longer yours. You kneel because someone has to. You do not touch her. You just look. You note the position of her arms. You note the way the fire kissed the edges of her clothing. You note what the rain has done and what the rain has not done. Rain is a good cleaner, but it is not perfect. It cannot wash away everything. Not if you know what you are looking for. And you do not yet. The first truth comes out slow, the way all uncomfortable truths do. She did not die from the burn alone. She had taken pills. Sleeping tablets, a lot of them. In her lungs, there is soot, which tells you she was breathing while the fire burned. That detail is clinical, and it is human. It means this was not just someone burning after death. It means she was alive during it, at least for some portion of it. It means the ending was not gentle. The valley offers no footprints that make sense. There is wet ground, but it is too broken, too trampled by weather and time. The place does not give up an easy trail. It rarely does. So you do what detectives always do when the outdoors refuses to talk. You go indoors. You go to records. You go to pockets, luggage, paper trails, and the quiet bureaucracy of travel. Because someone, somewhere, sold her a ticket, and the rain keeps falling while you chase that thought into town. In Bergen, at the railway station, there are 2 suitcases left in a locker. That is the kind of sentence that sounds boring until you understand what it means. It means she passed through here. It means she handled keys and coins. It means she chose to leave part of herself behind, like a traveler who expects to come back. The suitcases are not glamorous. They are practical, slightly scuffed, the kind you see leaning against hotel room walls. When the police open them, there is no dramatic reveal. There is no passport tucked into a neat envelope. There is no letter that explains everything. There is stuff, mundane objects, the inventory of a life trying not to be noticed. Clothes, some of them expensive, a few wigs, not costume wigs, real wigs, the kind used when you want to be a different person and you want it to look natural. There are non-prescription glasses, several pairs. There are cosmetics. There is a small amount of jewelry. There are stockings. There is a portable ironing board, because apparently even your secret identity needs crisp hems. And then there are the little things that make investigators sigh, because little things mean time. A spoon, a teaspoon to be exact, a couple of teaspoons, a brush, a wallet with no identification, a comb, a bottle of skin cream, later described as eczema cream, and a small collection of pills that do not come with a friendly label. Every item gets laid out, measured, photographed, bagged, named. The evidence room is not a cathedral. It is fluorescent light and paperwork. It is the smell of cardboard and rubber gloves. It is men trying to ignore their own tiredness. And then you see what is missing, not in a poetic way, in a very practical way. Every label is cut out. The tags inside clothing are removed with careful hands, not ripped, not torn in a hurry. Removed, the kind of removal that says someone had time and a reason. The maker's marks are gone. The laundry tags are gone. Even the suitcase itself is stripped of anything that could point to a store or a country or a shipping line. Congratulations. You are now looking at a person who planned to be anonymous, not just in death, in life. The detectives begin where you always begin, even when you know it is going to hurt. They try the obvious. They check missing persons reports. They look for women reported missing in Norway, in nearby countries, anywhere that might match. They check hotels. They check ferries and trains. They check customs records. And they run into the same wall again and again. Names. Names that go nowhere. Because she used aliases. Several. And not sloppy ones either. She checked into hotels with different names, different claimed nationalities, different addresses. Sometimes she claimed to be Belgian, sometimes something else. The ink on the registration cards looks confident, as if she had practiced, and the handwriting, when they compare it, looks consistent. One person, many faces. You imagine her standing at a hotel desk, rain in her hair, politely smiling at a clerk who wants to be helpful. You imagine her voice, calm, maybe slightly accented. You imagine how easy it is to lie when the other person just wants to finish their shift. The suitcase offers more, but only in the way a locked door offers more. You can see the shape of the room behind it. You cannot enter. The eczema cream becomes a tiny spark, a tube, a brand, something manufactured somewhere. Investigators chase it like a dog chasing a scent that is already fading. They trace pharmacies. They ask questions. They follow supply routes. It leads to a dead end. Not because the cream is fake, because it is common. Because it is the kind of product that can pass through many hands, across borders, without leaving a trail that matters. Sometimes the world is too big for your neat little theory. So you return to the suitcases. You return to the repetition of objects, wigs, glasses, clothes that change her outline, and you start to see the outline of a method, not necessarily a spy method, but a method of vanishing. There is also cash, not a fortune, but enough. And there are coins from different places, because travelers collect small metal evidence of where they have been, sometimes without even trying. It is in these small details that you feel the weight of the case settle onto your shoulders. Because if someone removed every label, it means they were afraid of being identified, or they were trained to avoid it, or they were simply dedicated to a private story no one else was allowed to read. And the thing about private stories is this: they rarely stay private after a death in the mountains. The detectives in Bergen do what tired, stubborn people always do. They keep listing, they keep sorting, they keep turning over each item like it might finally speak. And then, tucked among the ordinary, they find something that feels different in your hand. A notebook, not a diary, not exactly, not love letters, not a confession, a small book with pages filled with neat lines and marks, blue ink, numbers, letters, short clusters that look like someone trying to write down a schedule without making it obvious. Objects cannot speak, but sometimes they leave a paper trail, or in this case, a coded trail written in blue ink. You take the notebook into better light. The paper is slightly worn at the edges. The ink is steady. The codes are not the kind that require genius. They are the kind that require patience. Like most detective work, like most human lies. The police start with the idea that it might be some elaborate cipher, something elegant, something cinematic. It is not. It is practical. It is more like the way you hide a password by writing it as a grocery list. You are not trying to defeat a genius. You are trying to avoid casual eyes. They work it slowly, matching patterns to known travel routes, comparing dates to hotel records, checking train timetables, and the shapes begin to resolve into something almost boring. Dates, locations, movements, a list of travel that reads like a person pacing back and forth across Europe, never staying long, never becoming familiar. Bergen, Stavanger, Oslo, Trondheim, then out, then back. Hotels, Rooms, check in, check out. A rhythm that looks like work or fear or both. When you lay her travel against the map, you see a ghost walking the edges of normal life. She is always near people, but never with them. Always in public, but never known. Always paying cash, always leaving before anyone gets curious. The detectives go back through hotel staff memories, and you learn something about memory right here. Memory is not a recording. It is a story people tell themselves, and they change it each time. Still, a few staff recall her, a well-dressed woman, polite, reserved. Sometimes she ate alone. Sometimes she spoke to no one. There are descriptions of her having a foreign accent, but which foreign accent depends on who is remembering and how badly they want to be part of the story. Some recall a smell, not a bad smell. Perfume, strong, the kind that enters a room before the person does. Some recall that she asked to change rooms. Sometimes, as if she was worried about windows or neighbors or the angle of a hallway, and you can feel the case trying to slide into a familiar groove. Spy, Cold War, secret meetings in hotel lobbies, the kind of story that gives everyone permission to be excited. But you have worked too many cases to trust excitement. Excitement is usually just ignorance wearing a party hat. There were, in Norway at that time, military installations. There were tests, there were radar systems, there were reasons for foreign intelligence to pay attention. There were also ordinary reasons for an ordinary person to move strangely. An affair, a mental illness, a desire to disappear, a fear of someone very real and not at all glamorous. So you hold both possibilities in your hands. You do not choose yet. Choosing too early is how you miss the truth. The notebook points to specific dates and specific towns, and the police, being human, do the human thing. They chase the pattern. They ask who else was in those hotels. They ask who registered near her. They check the guest lists. They look for repeated names, repeated addresses, repeated handwriting. And mostly, they find nothing, because hotels in the 1970s are not what they are now. There is no digital trail, no camera in every lobby, no card key record. There are paper cards in drawers. There are clerks who sometimes do not fill them out properly. There are guests who lie, because lying is easy. They do find one repeating shape, though. A witness who says she was seen with men, plural, sometimes in lobbies, sometimes in restaurants, sometimes in conversation that looks serious. But a witness is not a photograph. A witness is a weather report after the storm has already passed. Useful, but imperfect. Still, the idea forms. If she met someone, if she was followed, if she was harmed, then the valley becomes a dumping ground, a quiet place, a place where the rain helps erase the edges. But the scene in the valley had burned objects arranged nearby. It had the feel of something personal, almost staged, not just disposal. It did not feel like a hurried murderer tossing evidence. It felt deliberate, and that is the detail that makes you tired, because deliberate means intention, and intention means motive, and motive means a human mind you have to crawl inside with all its dark corners. The autopsy brings more texture. Her teeth have dental work that suggests She did not grow up poor. She had money at some point. Her fingerprints are taken and sent out. They check Norway. They check nearby countries. They check international files. And what do they get back? Nothing. No match. Congratulations. The dead woman in the valley is not officially anyone. Not in the systems that count, not in the neat cabinets where governments store identities like paperwork. Her clothing, what is left of it, suggests taste, quality, not cheap. And that makes you wonder how she learned to erase herself so thoroughly. You go back to the burned items again in your mind. A plastic bottle that may have held something flammable. The sleeping pills, the umbrella, small things that could be ordinary until they are not. And then there is her face. Police do what they can. They take photographs. They create drawings. They distribute images. They ask the public. They ask embassies. They ask anyone who might recognize a woman who no longer looks like herself. The public response is what it always is. A few tips, a few confident guesses, a few people who want attention, and a few who genuinely think they know but cannot prove it. Nothing sticks, so the case becomes a room that stays unlocked in your mind. You walk past it at night, and you glance in, and you see the file sitting there like a patient animal. In the years that follow, the Isdal Woman becomes a story told in pieces. The woman with the wigs, the woman with the labels removed, the woman with the coded notebook, the woman in the valley. But tonight, you do not get to escape into folklore. Tonight, you stay in the evidence room. You look again at what she carried. You consider how people build identities. Most of us build them carelessly. A library card, a receipt, a friend who tags you in a photograph, a neighbor who knows your dog's name. She built hers like a professional liar, or like someone who had been hurt for being truthful. One of the most unsettling parts is how normal it all is. Suitcases, clothes, cream for irritated skin, a spoon for stirring tea, the details of a person who could be sitting 2 tables away from you in a cafe, quietly watching the door, and then, without warning, you remember the professor and his daughters. The first people to see her. They did not ask for this. They went for a walk, and they found a stranger's ending. That is how crime enters most lives. Not with gunfire, with a wrong smell in the rain. You follow the investigation forward a little more, because the notebook and the suitcases are not the only clues. There are also witness statements about her behavior. Some hotel staff later described her as cautious. Others said she seemed confident, even demanding. She sometimes asked for a room with a balcony. Sometimes she asked for a room not facing the street. Sometimes she paid for meals and did not eat them. Those details make you picture her alone in a room, curtains half drawn, listening to the sounds of other people living normally. A radio in the next room, footsteps in the hall, the soft knock of housekeeping, and her choosing when to be seen. At one hotel, she is described as wearing a wig. At another, she is described as having different hair. That could mean wigs. It could also mean a witness who cannot remember. Both are equally possible. Which is the problem? The police try to trace the shops where certain items were purchased. It is a slow grind. A clerk might remember selling a particular type of shoe, but not to whom. A store might have records, but paper gets thrown away. And even if you find a store, you still have to find the person who walked in, wearing a different name. Eventually, the file fills up with fragments. Fragments are heavy. They take up space. They do not give you closure. They just give you options. Theories accumulate like dust. Espionage. A foreign agent moving through Norway during a period of military tension. A courier. A handler. Someone involved in weapons technology or radar or naval secrets. The wigs and codes fit that story. But then you look at the valley again. You look at the pills. You look at the fire. You look at the careful removal of labels. And you see another story. A woman running from herself because spies do not usually die in hiking hollows with sleeping pills in their blood. They disappear. They get extracted. They get traded. Or they get silenced in ways that look less like a personal ending and more like a professional cleaning. This looked intimate. It looked messy. It looked like someone was trying to erase not just evidence, but meaning. And that is what makes the Isdal Woman so persistent. She is not just unidentified. She is unmade. Still, you cannot ignore the coded notebook. You cannot ignore the travel. You cannot ignore the strange repetition of hotel stays, the shifting names, the foreign currencies, the care taken to leave no thread for anyone to pull. So, you sit with the contradiction. You let it be what it is. In your line of work, contradictions are not problems. They are directions. Somewhere in those directions, there is a human truth. And the human truth is usually smaller than the legends built around it. At some point, the investigators begin to wonder about her origin. They study her features. They consider her dental work. They consider the items she carried. They consider, in that quiet way police do, whether her accent was real or performed. And you start to see how this case would exhaust a person. Every angle leads to another angle. Every lead becomes a hallway with more doors. You can spend a career chasing a name. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you do not. But finding the body was the easy part. Identifying who she was would become a riddle of removed labels and empty stares. So, you return, again, to the suitcases, to the inventory of nothing. Because if she refused to carry a name, maybe she carried something else instead. Something that points to a habit, a profession, a fear. You picture the spoon again, and you almost laugh. Not because it is funny, because it is human. A woman who wanted to vanish and still wanted tea stirred properly. Even ghosts have routines. And in the notebook, among the codes, you notice how repetitive the movement is. Not random, not wandering. It is like someone making rounds, like someone checking boxes. That is when the case starts to feel less like one death and more like a life lived sideways. The police catalog everything, and the list becomes its own kind of lullaby. Item after item, each one a small weight in a plastic bag, each one labeled in handwriting that never sleeps, each one waiting in a drawer, and somewhere in that drawer, the answer sits like a penny at the bottom of a fountain. Visible, out of reach. Objects cannot speak, but sometimes they leave a paper trail, or in this case, a coded trail written in blue ink, so you start reading it the way you read any lie that wants to look like math. You trace the blue ink with your fingertip, not touching the page, just hovering, because old habits die hard in evidence rooms. The marks are compact. They repeat. A few letters, a few numbers, slashes, dots. It looks like the sort of thing you would scribble if you had to remember appointments. But you did not want the wrong person to understand them. The kind of secrecy that is not romantic. Just practical, like hiding spare cash in a flour tin. The first breakthrough is not brilliance. It is boredom. It is someone, somewhere, sitting with train timetables and hotel registers, lining up dates with the places she had already been confirmed to visit. When one line matches a known check-in, another line becomes less mysterious. The code begins to soften around the edges. You learn that her symbols are not spells. They are shorthand. Letters standing in for towns, numbers for dates, little ticks and dots that mean morning or evening, arrival or departure, a room change, a delay. It is a travelogue stripped of poetry. And once it opens, it does not stop opening. It keeps saying the same thing in different ways. She moved. She kept moving. She did not settle long enough to become a regular anywhere. She did not linger long enough for a desk clerk to remember her laugh, or a waitress to remember her order. You can almost feel her leaving again and again, like a person who checks the mirror twice before shutting a door. Now you are the one pacing the map. Bergen, then out. Stavanger, then back. Oslo, then away again. A tight orbit around Norway, with little loops that look purposeful. There are days when she is in one place, then another, with just enough time between for the train, the ferry, the polite nod at a ticket window. Nothing impossible, nothing supernatural. Just a person who treated the country like a hallway. And the hotels, those become their own little universe of paper. You picture the registration cards laid out on a table, each one a stiff rectangle that smells faintly of ink and old fingers. The names are different, but the handwriting keeps leaning the same way. The strokes are consistent. The loops in certain letters are the same, like a signature trying not to be a signature. One night, she is Fenella something. Another night, she is Claudia something else. Another time, she claims a Belgian address that does not exist, or exists, but belongs to someone who never heard of her. It is not sloppy. It is worse. It is confident. Congratulations. You are now dealing with someone who did not panic when she lied. There are notes from staff too, because humans can never resist adding their little footnotes to history. One clerk says she spoke German. Another insists it was French. Someone else remembers English, crisp and careful, as if chosen from a shelf. And when the accents disagree, you are left with two options. Either she was multilingual or she was performing. Both options are exhausting. Because if she was performing, she was doing it in the way a professional does. Subtle, consistent, not overacted. The kind of performance that passes for truth. Because most people are too tired to challenge it. Most people just want to hand you a key and get back to their coffee. And then there are the room requests. You hear them in your mind the way the clerk would have heard them. Soft voice, polite words, the smile that makes it feel unreasonable to say no. She asks for a room with a balcony. Then, in another place, she insists on changing rooms. She does not like the one she is given. She wants another. To a hotel employee, it is a nuisance. To you, it is a habit, a pattern. You start to imagine what she was scanning for, a view of the street to see who follows, a balcony to slip out if she has to, a room change because someone might have seen her go into the first one, or because the first one had a connecting door, or a faulty lock, or a window that did not close all the way, or because the paranoia was inside her and it needed no reason. That is the pivot you keep circling: spycraft or fear, tradecraft or trauma. And the valley waits patiently while you debate it, because the valley does not care what story you choose. The valley only cares that she ended there. The evidence keeps coming in, the way it always does, late, incomplete, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and somebody else's desk. A witness, for example. Someone says she was seen with a man. Then another witness says it was 2 men. Then someone claims it was 3, because stories tend to grow extra limbs when they are passed around. The descriptions are vague, dark coat, foreign looking. That helpful phrase, foreign looking, which means nothing and feels like something, and you can feel the bureaucracy creak into motion. Detectives try to match her hotel stays with known visitors. They look for repeating male names and guest logs, because if she was meeting someone, maybe he was careless enough to be consistent. They look for check-ins that line up too neatly with hers, arriving the same day, leaving the next. They look for men who paid cash. They look for men who did not give a home address, or gave an address that belongs to a park, or a post office box, or an empty lot. Mostly, they find ordinary travelers, salesmen, sailors, men who wanted a bed and did not want questions. Norway in that era is full of quiet movement. Shipping, business, people coming and going without leaving much behind. And then, in the middle of all that normal, you get little oddities. There is the way she dressed. Not flashy, not attention-seeking, but deliberate. As if she understood what kind of clothing makes you invisible in a hotel lobby. Good quality, neutral colors, nothing that screams for memory. There is the way she carried herself, according to some staff. Upright, composed, not the posture of someone lost. And yet, she traveled with wigs and spare glasses and the kind of small disguises that tell you she expected to be looked for, or expected to look like someone else. In one hotel, a staff member later recalls that she seemed to be watching the lobby, not idly, not like a bored guest, watching like someone waiting for a specific person to arrive, or someone praying they will not. You stand there with that detail, letting it cool in your hands, because it is a detail that could mean everything, or could mean nothing. A lonely woman staring at a doorway is not a crime, but in the context of cut labels and coded routes, it becomes a bead on a string. There is also the money, not a fortune. Not the kind of thick roll you would expect in a spy film, but enough cash to live without leaving bank traces, enough foreign coins and bills to move smoothly through borders, enough to pay in a way that keeps your name out of ledgers. Cash is not proof of espionage. Cash is proof of caution, and caution can come from training or from experience. The police do what they can with her body too, because bodies are often more honest than luggage. They examine her teeth because dentistry is surprisingly regional. A filling style here, a crown type there, small choices in materials and method that can whisper a country of origin. Her dental work suggests she had access to competent care. She was not someone who had been neglected by the world. They check her fingerprints again, sending them out, hoping some other agency has a file. But it is the 1970s. Records are paper. Sharing is slow. Databases are not yet the hungry beasts they will become. The answer comes back the same as before. No match. The autopsy does give them certain cold truths. She had ingested sleeping pills, a significant quantity. That part is not disputed. And she had soot in her airways, which means she was breathing while the fire was happening. That is not a poetic detail. It is mechanical. Air in, smoke in, lungs still working. It narrows possibilities, but it does not finish the story because it still leaves you with questions that feel almost childish in their simplicity. Who lit the fire? Why? Was she already unconscious when it started, or awake enough to understand? Did she take the pills herself, or were they administered? Did she walk into that valley willingly, or was she brought, guided, threatened, coaxed? There is no neat answer waiting under a rock. And then you meet the small brutality of the scene again. Her belongings, partly burned, partly arranged. A plastic bottle, possibly used to carry something flammable. Charred remnants of paper. An umbrella, not the kind of thing you bring into a mountainside hollow, unless you were caught in weather, or unless you carried it, because you always carried it. And her jewelry, placed in a way that feels intentional, as if someone set it down rather than dropped it. You have seen scenes staged before, not with artistry, with panic. A hurried attempt to make an accident out of a choice, or a choice out of an accident. The human mind wants to shape chaos into a narrative, even when it is committing the chaos. So you consider two ugly options. One, she chose this, a self-ending, planned, controlled, with the fire meant to erase the body and erase the trail. If that is the case, then the cut labels are not spycraft. They are a person's attempt to keep their real name from being spoken over their remains. Two, someone else chose this for her. The pills were a tool. The fire was a tool. The label cutting was preparation. The aliases were cover. In that case, the valley is not a private grave. It is a disposal site, and you do not get to know which one is kinder, because both are terrible in their own way. The investigation does what investigations always do when the big answers refuse to show up. It hunts for the small ones. They try to trace the purchase of the sleeping pills. They look at packaging, at markings. They consider what could have been bought over the counter, what would have required a prescription. They ask pharmacies. They ask hospitals. They ask, in that steady, humiliating way, whether anyone remembers selling medicine to a woman whose name was not her name. It goes nowhere, because medicine is common, and clerks are human, and time is a solvent that dissolves memory. They try the wigs. Wigs are specific. Wigs are not something everyone buys. They visit shops that sell hair pieces. They ask owners about recent customers, about foreign women, about cash purchases, about anyone who seemed nervous. They get shrugs. They get maybe. They get the kind of half answers that keep a file alive but do not feed it. And the case begins to settle into that familiar nightmare, the kind where the evidence is plentiful, but it points in too many directions. Meanwhile, the public begins to help in the way the public always helps, by turning the unknown into a legend. People talk about spies because spies are exciting. People talk about secret agents because it makes the world feel organized. as if death has a job description. People talk about coded notebooks like they are treasure maps because a treasure map promises an ending. But the truth is, most codes are not grand. They are just a tired person's way of keeping track of where they have been. And most deaths are not elegant. They are just final. Still, there is one small stubborn detail that refuses to be boring. Her face. Authorities attempt reconstructions. They ask artists to draw her as she might have looked. They distribute those images. They ask other countries. They ask embassies. They ask shipping lines and airlines and anyone with a roster of travelers who might be missing a woman. And the tips come in like soft rain, constant but not heavy enough to flood the river. Some say she looks like a cousin. Some say she looks like a neighbor. Some say she looks like a woman they once saw at a train station years ago. The tips are emotional, not factual. That is not an insult. It is simply what people have. A face without a name becomes a mirror. Everyone sees someone they half remember. At some point, investigators also note something that feels like a whisper from her past. Her clothing had been altered, tailored, not cheap tailoring either. The kind of adjustment made to make expensive clothes fit perfectly. That suggests she had money or access to money, or at least the habit of maintaining a certain standard even while hiding. It does not tell you who she was. It tells you she cared about details. And the person who cares about details is rarely careless about the ending. There is also the strange matter of her movements in the last days. The notebook, the hotel records, and witness recollections form a rough timeline. She is in Bergen. She checks out. She is seen in town. She purchases something. Possibly, she travels. She ends up back near the area that will swallow her. You follow her in your mind like you are shadowing her at a distance. Always one street behind, always arriving just after she has left. You see her at a ticket counter, gloved hands on the edge of the desk. You see her in a corridor, the patterned carpet swallowing her footsteps. You see her turn a corner and vanish, and then the last stretch into the valley. Isdal is not a place you casually drift into if you are unfamiliar. It is not impossible, but it is not convenient. It is wet and uneven and not particularly welcoming, which means she either chose it deliberately or someone chose it for her. The case never gives you the satisfaction of a definitive answer, but it does give you that one constant gnawing impression. She was trying to control what could be known. Cut labels, false names, cash payments, a coded notebook, disguises. It all adds up to a person who treated identity like something dangerous, like something that could get you hurt. And that brings you back to the unglamorous truth about secrets. Some secrets are national, some are political, some are military, but most are domestic. Most are about who you loved, who you owed, who you betrayed, who you feared, and what you did that you cannot undo. You sit with that in the quiet because it softens the sharp edge of the spy story and replaces it with something more ordinary and more awful. A person can become anonymous without ever meeting an intelligence officer. A person can vanish because they want to, or because someone else wants them gone. And then, with all the slow patience of an evidence room, another detail slides forward from the paperwork. Hotel staff, in at least one place, recalled that she did not just ask to change rooms. She asked specifically for a room change after looking out the window, as if something about what she saw down there, streetlights, parked cars, the angle of the entrance, made her uneasy. It is not proof. It is not even reliable. It is memory, and memory is sloppy, but it is the kind of sloppy detail that feels human. It suggests a moment where her composure cracked just enough for someone else to notice. And when composure cracks, the story usually gets close to its ending. Police also take a hard look at the death itself, because if they cannot name her, they can at least argue about the manner of death. Suicide, accident, homicide. They examine burns, clothing remnants, the distribution of char. They consider how fire behaves outdoors, in wet conditions, in a rocky hollow. Fire does not like rain. Fire does not like damp moss. If you want a body to burn in that environment, you may need help, accelerant, fuel, intention. They find indications that something like that might have been used, which is not comforting. If she did it herself, then she was determined. If someone else did it, then they were not worried about the effort. Either way, the act was not casual. The sleeping pills complicated further. A person can swallow pills willingly. A person can also be made to swallow pills, or be given them in a drink, or be convinced they are something else. Toxicology can tell you the pills were there. It cannot tell you who put them there. And you start to notice how the case keeps circling the same blunt limitations. No cameras, no digital trail. Paper records that can be lost, burned, thrown away. Witnesses who remember feelings more than facts. A body that was damaged by fire, erasing some of the small clues bodies can offer. It is like trying to solve a puzzle after someone has poured coffee over it. So, investigators do the next best thing. They widen the net. They look beyond Norway. If she used false names in Norwegian hotels, maybe she used them elsewhere too. Maybe the same handwriting exists on registration cards in other countries. Maybe the same pattern of travel shows up in someone else's files. They contact agencies. They inquire. They send descriptions. They wait. And waiting becomes part of the case's personality. Years pass. The file stays alive in a drawer, and sometimes it is pulled out again when a new detective takes interest, or when a journalist asks too many questions, or when a tip comes in from someone who is convinced they finally recognized her. The Isdal Woman becomes a story that never quite belongs to any one decade. She is always just found, always just unidentified, always just out of reach. And because humans hate loose ends, they keep trying to tie her into the Cold War. You can understand why. Norway is strategically important. Northern waters, naval movement, listening posts. A quiet country sitting beside the loud machinery of superpowers. If she was a foreign operative, Norway would be a sensible place for meetings. And Bergen, with its port and its traffic, would be a sensible place to pass through without being memorable. But there is a problem with sensible spy stories. They tend to rely on competence, and her death, as it sits in your mind, does not feel competent. It feels desperate. It feels like a private collapse or a rough improvisation, not a clean operation. The fire was not clean. The scene was not erased. Her body was found. Her luggage was found. If she was a professional, someone failed her. And if she was not, then the spy story is just a costume people put on her, because they cannot stand the alternative, that a person can become this unknown, this thoroughly unclaimed, without any grand reason at all. Still, You keep the spy theory on the table because detective work is not about what you prefer. It is about what you cannot rule out. And there is another angle, less cinematic, more bureaucratic. Smuggling, not diamonds and microfilm, just money, goods, information. The kind of quiet commerce that happens in port cities. A person who travels constantly, who uses aliases, who carries cash, who watches doorways, could be moving something or avoiding someone. The wigs could be disguises. The codes could be deliveries. The constant hotel stays could be meeting points. Or it could all be a woman with a fractured life, using the tools she had to stay ahead of an unseen threat. And then, because the world insists on being complicated, you get that small, unnerving detail about her belongings again. Not just that labels were removed, but that they were removed carefully. You picture her in a room late at night with scissors, the radio low, the curtains shut, a neat pile of tags on the table like dead moths, snip after snip, patient, methodical. That is not a moment of panic. That is a ritual. You have seen rituals before. In different cases, people have little routines that make them feel in control. Some check locks 3 times. Some line up shoes. Some wash their hands until skin cracks. Some cut labels out of their clothes because a label can be a handle someone grabs. Rituals can be a symptom. They can also be training. Sometimes it is impossible to tell the difference, and the case keeps doing that to you, offering details that can be read in 2 ways and never telling you which one is true. At some point, someone in the investigation looks at the notebook again and notices that the pattern of travel is not just movement. It is repetition around certain dates, certain places, certain corridors. You begin to ask yourself a different question. Not who she was, but what she was doing. You map her stops against what was in those places at that time. Military sites, ports, industrial facilities, events, conferences, naval schedules, anything that could explain why she would appear, disappear, and reappear in certain towns like a tide. You do not get a clean match, but you get enough coincidence to keep the theory alive. And that is the curse of unsolved cases. Coincidence is always available. It is cheap. It is abundant. It fits any story you want to tell. So you return again to the body in the valley, because the body is the only thing you can trust was truly there. And you let your mind walk through the last hours as gently as you can, because this is not entertainment for the dead. This is the closest you get to witness. The air is cold. The moss is wet. The rocks are slick. She is not dressed like a hiker, which means she either underestimated the terrain or she did not plan to walk far. She carries an umbrella, which suggests she expects weather, but not wilderness. She has pills, which suggests sleep or escape. She has something flammable, maybe, which suggests planning. If she came alone, then she chose a lonely place. If she came with someone, then the valley offered privacy for whatever was said and done there. You picture a conversation in that hollow, voices low, the wind stealing words, the kind of exchange where one person is trying to keep calm and the other is trying to keep control. It is easy to imagine because humans repeat themselves. Threats do not change much across centuries. Neither do pleas. But imagination is not evidence. So you keep your hands off the story and look at what is left. Her identity remains unknown, but her existence is documented in these fragments. And those fragments have a strange dignity. They show competence. They show intention. They show someone who was not simply swept along by life. Even in hiding, she made choices, and then your mind does what it always does in a sleepless hour. It looks for another case, not because you are bored, but because the world is full of people who step off the edge and leave nothing but puzzles. The Isdal Woman is one ghost on one mountainside. She is not the only one. Somewhere else, far away, under a different sky, another unknown person lies in a different kind of quiet. Not rain this time. Salt air, warm sand cooling after sunset. And you do not leave Norway all at once. You leave the way you leave any case that will not end, slowly, reluctantly, with the file still open in your head. You let the valley fade into a gray blur, and you let the smell of wet moss be replaced by the smell of the ocean. You are standing on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. The year is 1948. It is early morning, and the light is pale and honest, the kind that makes everything look slightly tired. The sea is steady, folding itself onto the shore with the soft persistence of something that never learned to quit. The sand holds last night's footprints in shallow dents, and the air tastes like salt and cigarettes. You think you know what you are about to see. You think it is a drunk who fell asleep on the beach. You think it is a heart attack, a lonely end, a man who sat down to rest and never stood back up? Wrong. Because the man is sitting there like he meant to be found like this. He is propped against a low seawall, legs stretched out, ankles crossed with an odd little neatness. His head is tilted back slightly, as if he is enjoying the last of the night breeze. His eyes are closed, his mouth is relaxed, his posture is almost composed. He looks like a man pretending to sleep to avoid a conversation. He is wearing a suit, not beachwear, not work clothes, a proper suit, well cut, well kept, a white shirt, a tie, polished shoes, the kind that do not belong in sand. There is no obvious blood, no struggle torn into the beach around him, no dramatic wound, no message written in the sky, just a man in good clothes sitting in the wrong place at the wrong hour, refusing to wake up. People had noticed him the night before. That is another, one of those human details that makes everything worse. Witnesses later describe seeing him there in the evening, sitting in the same spot. One person remembers him lifting an arm slowly, then letting it fall like an irritated gesture, like he was swatting away a fly or waving off the world. Another witness thought he looked drunk or asleep or simply not worth bothering, because that is what people do at night. They mind their business. They tell themselves it is not their problem. And now it is morning, and you are here, and he is still there. Police arrive, and again, no hero entrance. Just men in uniforms, squinting in the light, stepping carefully in sand that wants to erase their footprints as soon as they make them. They check him. They find he is dead. And the first thing you do, because it is always the first thing, is search for identification. Wallet, papers, anything with a name. There is none. No driver's license, no letter, no card, No neat explanation tucked into a breast pocket. His pockets hold ordinary objects, cigarettes, a comb, a bus ticket, small coins, the kinds of things that mean nothing until they are all you have. He is carrying cigarettes of one brand, but the packet is filled with another brand, as if someone swapped them. That detail is small and strange. It could mean he ran out and refilled the pack. It could mean he wanted the world to see one thing while he used another. The suit itself is impeccable. The seams are clean. The fabric is good quality. He is not dressed like a man sleeping rough. He is dressed like a man who had somewhere to be. Then you get to the tags, because you always get to the tags. In this case, clothing labels are missing too. Not all of them at first glance, but enough to raise the same tired question. Why remove the maker's name from your clothes unless you do not want to be traced? Congratulations. You have stepped into a second story where anonymity is not accidental. They take him to the morgue. The autopsy begins, and the body offers the same kind of frustrating restraint as the Isdal Woman's file. There is no obvious cause of death, no bullet, no knife wound, no broken bones that scream at you. There are subtle signs that suggest poisoning could be involved, congestion, internal distress, clues that do not point to a single substance with a neat label. In 1948, toxicology is not what it will become. It is chemistry, yes, but it is not magic. Some poisons evaporate from the body like a lie fading from a page, and so the Somerton man becomes a question posed in a calm voice. Who is he? How did he die? Why did he come here? And why does it feel like he wanted to be found and also wanted to remain unknown? You start doing the same thing you did in Norway. You build his last hours from the scraps, witnesses, the spot on the beach, the time of night, the way he was seen reclining there, almost comfortable. The fact that no one heard a struggle, no one saw him stumble. His shoes are clean enough to suggest he did not wander far across sand. He may have been placed there, or he may have arrived carefully. Either way, he did not look like someone who had fought his way into that position. And then the police do what police always do. They empty his pockets. They list everything. They photograph everything. They turn him into an inventory. It is necessary. And somewhere in that inventory, there's a detail you do not notice at first, because you have to know where to look. A small pocket hidden inside the waistband of his trousers, a fob pocket, the kind designed for a train ticket, or a coin, or some small item a man wants to keep close. Inside that pocket, folded tightly, is a scrap of paper, small, trimmed, deliberate, 2 words printed on it, Tamam Shud. It does not sound like English, and it is not. It has the weight of something old, something final. And even before you know what it means, you can feel the case shift on its axis. Because people do not usually die with mysterious foreign phrases hidden in their clothes by accident. They translate it. Eventually, they trace it. They learn it is Persian, used at the end of a work, meaning it is finished, it is ended, it is done. The end, in the plainest sense. And now you are looking at a dead man on a beach with a hidden message that says the story is over, but you are not done, not even close. Because if the phrase came from somewhere, it came from a page. And if it came from a page, there is a book missing a piece of itself somewhere out there in the city. And books have owners, and owners have phone numbers, and phone numbers lead to houses. So you begin slowly to pull on the thread and listen for what unravels. The thread starts in a place that smells like dust and ink, a police property room where small items wait in envelopes like dried leaves. You hold that scrap of paper in your mind, not much bigger than a fingernail, and you follow it backward to the only sensible origin. A book. It takes time, because everything takes time. The beach gives you a body, but the city gives you paperwork. You canvass. You ask bookshops. You ask libraries. You ask anyone who sells used novels with broken spines and forgotten bookmarks. You wait for the one person who says, yes, that phrase, I have seen it. Tamam Shud is printed at the end of a particular book of poetry, a collection called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a book that has been popular for decades, the kind people keep on shelves as decoration, or keep in drawers like a private superstition. It is the sort of poetry that sounds sophisticated even when you barely understand it. Life is brief. Drink the wine. The candle goes out. The end. Eventually, a man comes forward with an ordinary story that lands like a weight. He says he found a book in his car, not neatly placed, not wrapped, not handed to him with a warning, just there, tossed into the back seat as if someone wanted to get rid of it quickly. The car had been parked near Somerton Beach, close enough that the sea air could have seeped in and salted the upholstery. He had not thought much of it at the time. People leave things. People are careless. But this is not a careless case. The police take the book, and you can almost hear the dry crackle when they open it. The pages are worn. The cover is plain. And at the back, where the last poem should end cleanly, there is a rough absence, a piece torn out. The torn edge matches the scrap found in the dead man's hidden pocket, not metaphorically, not poetically, physically. Paper fibers lining up like a lock, accepting a key. It is one of those rare moments in investigation when something fits without argument. Congratulations. You have just found a bridge between the beach and a stranger's hands, and the bridge has fingerprints all over it, even if none of them are in a database. You look for the obvious next: ownership marks, a name scribbled inside the cover, a stamp from a library, a note, anything human. The book refuses to be personal in that way, but it does offer something else. On the back pages, there is writing, indented, scored into paper, as if written hard with a pencil, leaving a ghost of words behind. You tilt it toward the light. You squint. You let your eyes relax until letters appear, a phone number, and beneath it, lines of capital letters arranged like someone tried to build a fence out of the alphabet. It is not a sentence. It is not a quotation. It is a cluster of symbols that looks like a code or a private shorthand, or the kind of thing you write when you are trying to remember something but cannot risk writing it plainly. This case is starting to feel familiar now, in a tired way. A dead body with no name and a code that refuses to introduce itself. You copy the letters carefully, because detectives copy everything carefully. The code is short, several lines, some letters repeated, some lines ending oddly, as if unfinished. It is not beautiful. It is not elegant. It is human, which means it might be solvable, or it might be meaningless. Humans are great at producing nonsense with confidence, but the phone number is not nonsense. A phone number is a doorbell, so you dial it. You do not get a mysterious voice from a shadowy agency. You get an ordinary woman in an ordinary house, a short walk from the beach. She is a nurse. People later call her Jeston because the press loves a nickname and because privacy becomes a luxury once your number is found in a dead man's poetry book. You go to her house, and the day is bright. In that way, Adelaide can be sunlight that makes everything look too clean for what you are doing. The street is quiet, birds in trees, neighbors who glance once and then look away because they do not want to be part of it. You knock, you introduce yourself, and you watch her face as you explain why you are there. You do not tell her the whole story at once. You never do. You give her pieces, and you see which pieces make her flinch. When you mention the book, when you mention the scrap, her expression tightens, just for a moment. Not a dramatic gasp, not a scream. Something smaller, like a muscle remembering pain. She says she does not know the man. That is the first answer. It is clean. It is simple. It is also the kind of answer people give when they are about to spend the next hour saying everything except the truth. You ask if she has ever owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. Yes, she says. She did. Once. You ask if she gave it to anyone. She hesitates, and you can see the calculation. Not criminal calculation, necessarily. Social calculation. How much can I say before my life becomes a headline? She tells you she gave a copy to a man years ago. A soldier. She says, a man named Alfred Boxall. It was during the war. During that time when people gave each other books the way they gave cigarettes, the way they gave small promises. The name Boxall becomes a new thread, and threads multiply fast in cases like this. You do what detectives do. You find Boxall, or you try to, because you think you are about to close the loop. You think the dead man is Boxall, returned with a poetic farewell. You think this is romance turned fatal. You think you are standing at the edge of a story that finally makes sense. Wrong. Boxall is alive. He is located, and he is very much breathing. Very much annoyed to be pulled into this. He still has his copy of the Rubaiyat, and it is intact. No torn page. No missing Tamam Shud. The book looks like a book that has been carried, maybe cherished, but not mutilated. So the clean romantic solution collapses in your hands like wet paper. The nurse insists she does not know the dead man. She insists she has not seen him. She insists she has no idea how her number ended up in that book. And then the police do something that feels cruel, but is routine. They show her a plaster cast. In those days, investigators sometimes made death masks, a kind of three-dimensional record of a face before time changes it. The Somerton man's face has been cast in plaster, his closed eyes and calm mouth preserved in pale silence. They bring it to her. They watch her reaction. And this is where the case earns its place in your sleepless brain. Because she does not react like someone seeing a stranger. She reacts like someone who has been struck. Accounts vary, because accounts always vary. But the essence is the same. She goes pale. She looks away. She appears shaken, as if something inside her has been yanked hard. Then she recovers. Quickly. Too quickly. She says again, she does not know him. Congratulations. You have just met the worst kind of clue. the human one, because a fingerprint either matches or it does not. A blood type either fits or it does not. But a reaction is a foggy window. You can press your face to it, and you still cannot see clearly through. You leave her house with more questions than you brought in. You stand on the sidewalk, and you listen to the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood continuing to be ordinary. A dog barking, a car passing, a screen door closing. Inside that ordinary house, a woman holds a secret or holds a fear, and you cannot tell which. Back at the station, the code from the book sits on a desk like a dare. Cryptographers take a look. People with training, people with patience. They try common systems. They try substitution. They try to see if the letters could stand for words, initials, places. They consider military ciphers because the war has left everyone thinking in that direction. Nothing resolves cleanly. Some suggest it could be an acrostic, the first letters of words in a phrase or poem. Others suggest it is random, or a mnemonic that only makes sense to the person who wrote it. The problem with mnemonics is they are private by design. They are not meant to be solved by outsiders. Meanwhile, the dead man refuses to identify himself in every other way too. His clothing is examined again. The labels that remain are not helpful. Some tags have been removed, and the ones that remain point nowhere specific. The suit is good quality, tailored. The stitching suggests it was altered, adjusted to fit him. He was cared for, at least by himself. His hair is neat. His hands show no heavy labor. His nails are clean. His teeth are good. Not perfect, but not neglected. Then you get into the small anatomical oddities that investigators later fixate on, because when you have no name, every detail becomes a possible label. His ears, for example, have an unusual shape, some say, with a particular hollow that is less common. His teeth have a certain pattern, including missing lateral incisors, which can be rare. People begin to wonder if these features could be used to trace him to a family line, a population, a region. It is the kind of thinking you do when you cannot do anything else. You measure a man's skull because you cannot measure his life. And still, nothing. No one claims him. No missing persons report slides into place like a puzzle piece. No friend shows up at the morgue, hollow-eyed, saying, "That is him. That is my brother, my husband, my father." He remains unclaimed, which is not romantic. It is administrative. Unclaimed bodies are processed, paperwork is filed, graves are dug. A human being becomes a case number and a location on a map. But before that happens, the case keeps twitching because the nurse is still there, living a short walk from where he died, and the book is still there, with her number pressed into its paper like a bruise. And the letters are still there, refusing translation. You revisit the beach in your mind, because detectives always revisit the seawall, the angle of his body, the calmness, the lack of obvious struggle, the fact that witnesses saw him alive, or at least present, the night before. You consider poison again. In those years, certain poisons were known to be hard to detect. Some plant-based toxins, some compounds that do their work and then vanish, leaving only signs that could be dismissed as natural disease. The autopsy noted congestion, perhaps, an enlarged spleen, signs that could be consistent with poisoning, but not exclusive to it. And that is the cruel genius of poison when it is used. It creates plausible deniability. It turns murder into a shrug. If you want someone to die without a scene, you do not bring a weapon that screams. You bring something that whispers, but you still need a delivery. A drink, a cigarette, a pill, a syringe, a kiss, if you want to get poetic about it. And poisoners rarely get poetic. They get practical. So, you look again at the cigarettes. He had a packet of one brand with cigarettes of another brand inside. That detail has been argued over for decades because it is the sort of small inconsistency detectives love. It suggests swapping, disguising, or simply refilling a pack with whatever you had. Could it be how poison was delivered? A tampered cigarette, one among many. Something that would not be obvious. Something that would be consumed in a slow, ordinary way. Or could it be nothing at all? A man who liked a certain packet and did not care what was inside. This is how unsolved cases wear you down. They make you argue with yourself over the size of a cigarette paper. And then there is the manner of his clothing. His tie is knotted neatly. His shirt is clean. His shoes are polished. His trousers are pressed. Even the sand does not seem to have truly invaded him, as if he did not spend long walking through it. Some suggest he was carried to the spot. That is possible. But carrying a fully grown man in a suit onto a public beach without being seen is not easy. Someone would notice. Someone would remember a struggle, or at least an awkward dragging, unless it happened late in low light with someone practiced, or with more than one person, or with the kind of quiet efficiency that does not draw attention. Or he walked there himself, sat down, arranged his body in that composed way, and waited. That is a thought that lands heavily because it suggests choice, and the scrap saying it is finished begins to sound less like a taunt and more like a farewell. But farewells still have origins. Farewells come from somewhere. Someone writes them for a reason. You keep circling back to the nurse because the human mind loves a nearby suspect. The number is nearby. The house is nearby. The reaction is nearby. But proximity is not proof. Proximity is just geography. And geography has a cruel sense of humor. The police question her again and again in different ways. They ask about Boxall. They ask about her life during the war. They ask about any foreign men she may have met. They ask whether she recognizes the man's clothing, his posture, his face, his hands. She gives little. She stays contained. At times, she appears genuinely distressed. At times, she appears guarded. It is hard to tell the difference because both look the same when a woman is trying to keep control in a room full of men with notebooks. She eventually marries. She moves forward in life. The case does not let her go. Not really, but life continues anyway. It always does. And the code remains stubborn. People have tried to break it for decades, and they keep finding the same wall. Too few letters, not enough context. It is like overhearing 3 words of a conversation and trying to reconstruct the entire argument. A code without a key is just decoration. Still, you make note of something important. Whoever wrote those letters in the book wrote them with the expectation that they would not be found by an outsider. They were either careless or they believed the book would stay private. which implies the book belonged to someone, at least for a while, who trusted their privacy. And yet, it ended up thrown into a car, and a scrap from it ended up hidden in a dead man's pocket. So, something changed. Something went wrong. That is often where death lives, in the moment the plan stops behaving. You also notice the way both this case and the Isdal Woman case share a particular kind of cruelty. They are not just unsolved murders or deaths. They are unsolved identities. A person can die and still be known. A family can grieve even without answers. But when a person dies without a name, it is like a book with its cover torn off. You can read the pages, you can feel the weight of it, but you cannot file it properly in your mind. The Somerton Man becomes a story told with the same tired refrain. No one knows, no one can prove, no one can say. And yet, evidence keeps trying. Years later, people re-examine photographs, they reread autopsy notes, they retest old assumptions. They ask whether his cause of death could have been natural, whether the poisoning theory is a narrative people prefer, because it is more interesting than a sudden medical collapse. But then you remember Tamam Shud. You remember the careful hiding of it in a small pocket, the kind of place you would use for something precious. You remember the torn edge matching the book. You remember the phone number, and it is hard to believe all of that happened by accident. Hard, but not impossible. Because humans are capable of incredible coincidence, and investigators are capable of building towers of meaning on top of coincidence, just because they cannot stand the emptiness. So you keep your mind steady. You let the facts be facts. A dead man, unidentified. A scrap of paper, torn from a poetry book. Reading Tamam Shud. A copy of that book found in a car near the scene, with a phone number and an undeciphered code written inside. A nurse living nearby, linked by the phone number, who reacts strongly to the man's image, but denies knowing him. A man named Boxall, who received a similar book in the past, but is not the dead man. That is what you have, and that is what you do not have. You do not have a name for the body. You do not have a clear cause of death. You do not have a confession, just a trail that keeps stopping short of the finish line. And then, because this case does not know how to stop being strange, you get another administrative detail that sounds dull until you taste it. The suitcase. The Somerton Man's belongings include a suitcase left at a railway station. Like the Isdal Woman, he had luggage separated from the body. Like the Isdal Woman, the luggage contains clothing and small items. And like the Isdal Woman, there are hints of label removal. You examine the list because lists are what you do when nothing makes sense. Clothes, neatly folded, toiletries, thread, and needle, because even anonymous men mend their own socks. A stencil kit, some reports say, the kind used for marking crates or cargo. That detail makes some people lean toward maritime work, or military logistics, or just a man who liked being prepared. Nothing in it introduces him properly. No letters, no identification, no clear place of origin. Just a life reduced to fabric and small necessities. And you notice how these unknown dead are not carrying mementos, no family photographs, no addressed envelopes, no little sentimental anchors. Either they were lonely, or they were careful, or both. The investigation chases his clothing again, looking for where it was made, who sold it. Tailors are questioned. Laundry marks are studied. In those days, laundries sometimes marked clothing with small codes to keep track of customers. Those marks can be traced sometimes back to a specific laundry, a specific city, but it is never clean. Businesses close, records vanish. People forget. The world refuses to preserve what detectives wish it would. And the longer the case goes on, the more it becomes a kind of public property. Newspapers print theories. Amateur code breakers write letters. People claim sightings. People claim expertise. The dead man becomes a canvas, and everyone wants to paint. But in the quiet hours, in the evidence room part of your mind, you keep returning to the simplest human moment in the whole story. Someone, at some time, tore that phrase from a book. Someone folded it, someone hid it, and then someone died with it. That is not a ghost story. That is a decision. Whether it was the dead man's decision or someone else's, you cannot say. But decisions are the closest thing to motive you have, and motive is where investigation lives. So, you widen your lens. If the phrase is Persian, if the book is a known edition, if the code resembles military or intelligence shorthand, if the time is post-war, you begin to ask whether this man moved in circles where coded messages were ordinary. Adelaide in 1948 is not an isolated village. There are military facilities, there are returning servicemen, there are ships coming in and out, there are quiet corridors of government work where people do not advertise their jobs. Espionage is always tempting here too, for the same reason it was tempting in Norway. It offers structure. It offers villains and handlers and secret meetings. It gives the dead man a purpose, bigger than simple human mess. But you have to be careful, because the world after war is full of men with complicated pasts who are not spies. It is full of broken people who do not know how to live normally again. It is full of affairs and hidden children and shame and debts and health problems that are not spoken aloud. The most common secret is not a state secret. It is a personal one. So you keep both stories on the table, and you do not let either one get too comfortable. You think again of the nurse. Her reaction matters even if you cannot prove why, because humans do not usually react that way to a stranger's face. They might be curious, they might be disturbed, but to appear physically affected, to turn pale, to recoil, that implies recognition, or at least a memory triggered hard. Could she have known him under another name? Could she have known him briefly, years before? Could he be the father of a child, a lover, an acquaintance from wartime, a man who disappeared and then returned as a body on a beach? And then you remember, she gave a copy of that same poetry book to Boxall, which means she had a connection to that book and possibly to men who valued it. The rubaiyat is the kind of gift that can carry a message. It is romantic. It is melancholy. It is also a little theatrical. Exactly the kind of gift someone gives when they want to seem deep. If the Somerton man had been part of that circle, it would make sense that he used the book as a hiding place. People hide things in books because books are trusted. Books sit on shelves and no one searches them unless they are looking for a specific page. But the book was found in a car, tossed away, which suggests haste, disposal, a mistake. A mistake is what you live for as an investigator. People can plan crimes. People can plan disappearances. But they cannot plan their own exhaustion forever. Eventually they slip. Eventually they drop something. The book in the car feels like a drop. Someone carried it. Someone had it close. Someone then wanted it gone. The beach is close. The dead man is close. The nurse is close. The web tightens, but it does not close. And the code still sits there, quiet. You look at the letters again, and you let yourself imagine what it could be without getting too excited. Initials of names, places, a schedule, a list, a mnemonic for verses, the first letters of a poem line by line, or a simple substitution cipher where each letter stands for another. The trouble is, it is too short. It is like having a keyhole with no door. And then you remember something else about how humans write private codes. Sometimes they are not meant to be decoded later. Sometimes they are meant to jog memory in the moment, like writing milk on your hand when you go to the store. If someone else sees it, it means nothing. But to you, it means do not forget. If the Somerton man wrote those letters for himself, they could be a reminder of names, meetings, tasks. If someone else wrote them, it could be instructions. Either way, it is a life lived with hidden notes, which is a life lived with pressure. And pressure is where people break. So, you map the last known movement again. He is seen on the beach at night. He is dead by morning. He has no identification. His luggage is left elsewhere. A scrap of paper says, "It is finished." A book appears in a car nearby with a number leading to a nurse. There is a rhythm to it that feels like an ending arranged. But arranged endings can be self-arranged, too. Suicide is not always dramatic. It is sometimes tidy. It is sometimes a person sitting down in a public place and letting the body stop. But suicide with a hidden message in Persian poetry, that is not typical, not impossible, just specific, which pushes you back toward the possibility of someone else involved. Someone who wanted the end and wanted it to look like the end was chosen. And in the middle of all that speculation, there is a quiet, bureaucratic truth that keeps humming. Even if you solve the code, even if you trace the phone number, even if you build a story that satisfies your mind, you still have to prove it. Proof is the difference between a campfire tale and a court file. And this case, for a long time, stayed out of court entirely. It stayed in that limbo where mysteries live, reported, debated, filed, reopened, and never resolved in a way that lets everyone exhale. You can feel how this would gnaw at investigators. Not because it is thrilling. Because the dead man's face is calm in every photograph, and that calmness becomes almost insulting. You want him to look haunted or afraid or angry, because then you could match emotion to motive. But he looks like someone who laid down willingly, as if the hardest part had already happened long before he reached the seawall. And that thought that the real struggle happened earlier, out of sight, that is the kind of thought that makes detectives stare at ceilings at 3 a.m. Now, because your mind is a filing cabinet that refuses to close, you start noticing the pattern across the cases you have been holding tonight. The Isdal Woman, moving through hotels with false names, labels removed, coded notes. The Somerton Man, found without identification, labels missing, code in a book, ending phrase hidden on his body. Different continents, different decades, same human impulse to be unknown, to keep your name out of other people's mouths, to step out of the world like a person turning off a light. And once you see that impulse, you begin to see it elsewhere too, not just in valleys and beaches, but in places built specifically to watch over others. Places that run on routine, places that are supposed to be predictable, places where predictability is the whole point. A lighthouse, for example. A lighthouse is not romantic when you work with it. It is a job. It is cleaning lenses, trimming wicks, hauling oil, logging weather. It is repetition, the kind of repetition that keeps ships from turning into splinters. A lighthouse is a machine made of human routine, so when the routine breaks, it does not feel like an accident. It feels like something reached in and removed the people. And that is how you end up far from warm sand, far from Norwegian valleys, standing instead on the edge of cold Atlantic water where the sky is low and the sea never stops moving. You are heading toward the Flannan Isles. Even the name sounds like something whispered in a pub when the fire is low. The Flannan Isles sit off the coast of Scotland, hard rock in hard water, a place where the wind does not ask permission. In the year 1900, there is a lighthouse there, newly built, meant to tame a little piece of the sea's cruelty. 3 lighthouse keepers are assigned to it. Men used to isolation, men used to weather, men used to the kind of silence that makes city people twitch. Their job is simple, in theory. Keep the light burning, log the weather, maintain the station, wait for relief, and then they vanish. Not in a poetic way, in a practical way that makes paperwork pile up. The story begins with a ship called the Hesperus, a relief vessel heading out to bring supplies and rotate staff. You imagine the approach first, because approach tells you what the sea wants you to know. The water is rough, but not impossible. The wind is sharp. Salt spray crusts sun metal. The islands rise ahead like dark teeth. The lighthouse stands on its rock, pale against gray sky, a straight-backed thing, trying to look confident. As the relief ship gets close, there is a small, immediate wrongness. No one is there to greet them. Lighthouse keepers are not supposed to be casual about relief arrivals. Supplies matter. Mail matters. Human voices matter. Even the grumpiest keeper comes out, if only to complain. But the landing is quiet. The men on the relief ship call out. They get only wind in return. The only answers are gulls and the slap of water against stone. You step onto the island in your imagination and you feel the ground shift slightly under your boots. Not because the rock moves, but because the wind pushes you, as if trying to herd you back into the sea. The lighthouse door is closed. That is not strange by itself. It should be closed. You do not leave doors open in a place where the Atlantic tries every day to get inside, but it is closed in a way that feels unattended. No movement behind it, no sound of footsteps, no human presence leaking out through cracks. They go in, and what they find is not chaos. That is what makes it worse. The lighthouse interior looks orderly. The kitchen is not smashed. The bunks are there. The equipment is there. The clocks are there. The light apparatus is there. This is not a place that looks like a fight happened. It looks like men stood up in the middle of an ordinary moment and did not come back. One chair is tipped. Some accounts say, as if someone rose too quickly. The table has signs of a meal interrupted. Depending on which retelling you trust, the place feels lived in, and then suddenly not. The logbook is present. That matters. Lighthouse keepers log everything: weather, maintenance, unusual events. The logbook is their memory, and it is also their accountability. Outside, the gate is closed. Again, that detail sounds minor until you understand routine. A closed gate suggests the men did not leave by choice in a hurry. Or if they did, they closed it behind them, which is a habit so ingrained it can survive panic. There is also the flag. In some accounts, the flag is not flying when it should be. In others, it is present but not used. Again, routine matters. A lighthouse station has signals, and signals are used when things are wrong. If the men were in trouble, why no signal? If the men left voluntarily, why leave everything? And now the island begins to show its teeth. You walk around the exterior, and the wind carries the smell of seaweed and cold stone. The waves hit the cliffs below with that deep, slow boom that feels like breathing from something too large. You look for the men. You find none. No bodies in obvious places. No footprints you can trust, because rock does not keep prints like sand or snow. No trails, no answers, but you do find signs of damage near the landing area. Equipment disturbed, rails bent, a storage box smashed. In some reports, evidence that the sea had thrown something heavy against the structures. It suggests a storm. The sea is good at making men disappear during storms. That is not a mystery. That is a job description for the ocean. But there is a complication, and it is the same kind of complication that always turns a simple tragedy into a long haunting. The weather records from the mainland do not show a storm of the intensity described in the lighthouse logbook. And now you are back in the familiar place. Two stories that do not match. On the island, the keepers write about violent weather, about winds that shake them, about seas that terrify even seasoned men. On land, the records say things were rough, perhaps, but not catastrophic, not enough to explain 3 men being taken. So you have to ask, were the men exaggerating? Were they experiencing a localized storm that the mainland did not feel? Or were they writing about something else entirely, using weather as the only language they had that would not get them mocked? Because men in isolated stations do not like to admit fear. They will write storm instead of panic. They will write wind instead of dread. You bring the logbook closer in your mind, and you let the ink become fresh again. The entries in the days before the disappearance begin to sound strained, not just technical, emotional. Words that imply unease, words that suggest the keepers were not sleeping well, were on edge, were praying. One entry mentions one man being quiet. Another mentions another man crying or praying, depending on the account repeated through the years. Lighthouse logs are not supposed to contain that kind of confession. They are supposed to be measurements and maintenance. So when emotion leaks into the log, it is a crack. And cracks are where you look. The last entry, famously, reads with a kind of weary finality. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. It is the sort of line people quote because it sounds ominous, but you do not have to dramatize it. The line is already tired. It already sounds like someone trying to soothe themselves with words they learned as a child. Storm ended. Sea calm. If that is true, then their disappearance is not in the middle of chaos. It is after, which means they went out when they did not have to, or they went out because something demanded it. A rope loosened, a crate lost, a lamp failure, a signal problem. Something that required attention near the cliff edge, where attention is always punished. And this is where the case shifts into the small, boring mechanics of accident, because lighthouse work is dangerous in stupid ways, not glamorous ways. Wet steps, heavy chains, slippery rock, a sudden wave that arrives higher than the last 100 waves. Just because the sea felt like it. One man goes out to secure something, another goes to help. The third goes because leaving 2 men alone outside is against safety practice. Then, a wave hits, or a slip happens, or a rope snaps. 3 men can vanish quickly if they are all in the wrong place at the same time. That is the sensible explanation. It is also the explanation people resist because it feels too ordinary for such a haunting. But ordinary is exactly what the sea specializes in. Still, you cannot ignore the unanswered pieces. Why did they all go? Why no signal? Why the door closed behind them? Why the log entries sounded so shaken? Why mainland weather records did not match their terror? The island keeps its answers in water, and water is an unreliable witness. And in the middle of all of this, you realize something about these mysteries you have been walking through. They are quiet mysteries. No screaming, no chase, just absence. A body with no name. A man with a scrap of poetry. A lighthouse without its keepers. They are mysteries that do not demand your adrenaline. They demand your patience. And patience at night can feel like a lullaby. So you stay with the lighthouse a little longer. You picture the relief crews searching every building, every corner, every ledge where a man might have crawled injured. You picture them calling names into the wind, hearing their own voices flung back at them in pieces. You picture the slow acceptance settling in, that no one is answering because no one is there to answer. They take notes. They mark the state of the station. They lock things up. They leave. And leaving an island like that is its own kind of dread, because you have to turn your back on it. You have to look away from the lighthouse as it shrinks into gray distance, knowing 3 men vanished there, and the light will keep turning because the job continues even when the people do not. Back on shore, inquiries happen. Admiralty officials read reports. Men in offices decide what is likely. Newspapers write what is thrilling. And the lighthouse becomes a story. Some suggest a rogue wave. Some suggest a fight. Some suggest something stranger, because isolation makes people imaginative. But the physical reality remains: harsh rock, heavy sea, and a job that requires you to stand near the edge and pretend you are not afraid. And fear, when it finally arrives, does not always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like an entry in a logbook. Sometimes it looks like a prayer written in ink. And as you hold that thought, the next part of the story is waiting for you, because logbooks are not just eerie artifacts. They are timelines. They are the closest thing you get to the last voice of the missing. So you open the log again, and you start reading it not like literature, but like a tired worker's record, line by line, weather by weather, with the sea making its steady, indifferent noise outside. You see the small details first, the kind of details that only exist in routine, The lamp mechanisms are cleaned, the beds are made, the oil supply is accounted for, and then there is that thin line of handwriting where the men admit, without meaning to, that they were scared. Not of the sea, they knew the sea. Not of work, they were built for work. But of something off about that stretch of days, when the weather felt bigger than the island could hold. You read it and you realize the lighthouse did not fail. The people did, or the edge of the world reached up and took them, the way it sometimes does, without witnesses. And that is the pattern you keep carrying tonight. A woman in a Norwegian valley with her name cut away. A man on an Australian beach with the end of a poem hidden in his pocket. 3 keepers on a rock, leaving only ink and silence. You want a final answer because you are human. But the truth is quieter. Some cases do not resolve. They just settle into the world, like salt into wood, like rain into moss. So you close the logbook in your mind, gently, like you are not trying to wake the dead. Outside, the sea keeps moving, steady, indifferent, and strangely calming.